My name is Roger Saunders. I'm an associate professor at the Montfort University, teaching marketing and advertising, but my interest really is in all things active learning, specifically playful learning and gamification. And so what I wanted to do today was a relatively practical session. Oh, assuming my slides will move on. There you go. Okay, so for anyone who doesn't actually want to cut and paste that, there is a QR code. So if anyone has a QR code reader, feel free to load that up onto your phone and very quickly put that through. Unfortunately, because we do only have 20 minutes, I can't leave it up for very long. So it may be that some people find QR codes easier to use than others. And for anyone who doesn't, as I said, the link is in the chat bar, and hopefully if the link isn't working, someone will tell me. So one of the things that I'd like you to do, it's mentioned on a later slide, is if you know already that you would like to develop a card game idea and you either want to ask me questions after the session or you would like me to talk to you about the card games that you would like to do, then could you please, in your Padlet post, so I'm waving a paintbrush around, could you in your Padlet post put your name and your email address? And I'm also interested in the subjects that people teach. I teach marketing and advertising, but I'm particularly interested in how the things that I'm going to talk about are transferable. So the first thing is, in terms of making cards, there's lots of different cards, and I'm going to take you through sort of the most basic versions through to something that's a little more complicated, and the complicated one won't be possible to do today, but it's something that people might want to talk about further. The simple one is, and I was talking to somebody who actually pointed out that even if you only did this from a sustainability point of view, it would make a significant difference. But you can buy blank playing cards these days. The one on the screen on the right hand side is actually the example of the cards I use. They're really quite cheap. They are what are called poker cards, so they're actually slightly larger than playing cards, but you will still find that a lot of board games and card games use this particular size of cards. They're blank on one side, and although you do need to find yourself a decent cleaning material, it does mean that if you use whiteboard markers, they are reusable. And so in essence, anything that you could do on a post-it note, you can actually do on a blank playing card. And I think it makes a difference. Clearly, if you want to actually stick things up on the wall for people to see, then that's fine. But post-it notes, in my experience, don't necessarily work that well on a vertical surface. And if they're going to work on a horizontal surface, then there's no reason why you can't use blank playing cards. The things I want to take you into now, you can relate to your own subject area. So what I've tried to do is not necessarily make all of these, although some of them are based on things that I've done, but they're also based on things that I've seen other people do. And I've tried to incorporate subjects which aren't my own. So the first type of card is just a single idea card. The card on the left is actually from a board game called Dixit. And it's based around a pack of 84 cards that contain these sort of relatively surreal illustrations. And I use these instead of postcards because I've seen the exercise done with postcards in the past, where you just invite students in and you ask them to select a card that means something to them in some way. And then to talk to the other students about what that is and why that is. So it's an icebreaker exercise, but it's quite a nice one because they're referencing an artifact as opposed to talking directly about themselves, even though they are still talking directly about themselves. And it makes for some very interesting discussion. The one on the right hand side is an example of the kind of card you might use with a single idea on it, where this is perhaps where you're teaching biology. And again, unfortunately, I can't see the chat at the moment, but if anyone would like to have a guess at which organ in the human body that was. And so hopefully, you know, some students would go, oh, that's but I can't remember what it is now. I think it's a kidney, because you have two of them. And so you start off, and first of all, it's just a recognition thing, but then you can talk about, okay, what does the kidney do? What's its function? And it's just perhaps a slightly more interesting way of introducing the idea, rather than just having it on screen, because it also means that you can divide the cards around. You can get students to talk about the cards in relatively small groups. They can talk about different cards. They can present back to the other students. And I'm a big fan of the tactile nature of what cards offer. So as I'm reading this out, I want you to think about your own subject and maybe things that you teach in your own subject. So for example, in my subject, I'm going to reference PEST, which is political, economic, social, technological, which is a model which is used all the time. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure most people are probably aware of. There's a reference to Bloom's taxonomy, which again I use when I'm involved in our equivalent of the PG CAP. So I'm going to mention the types of card, but I want you to think about if you were trying to teach the particular topic that comes up frequently in your own modules, how could you apply this? So this is another set of single cards with a shared idea. So I teach creativity, and one of the things I do, I actually use this particular set because I kind of have my own, but you can give people a set of characters, settings and objects, and you can do this with other things as well. And you just ask them to select randomly one card from each thing. So the cards themselves are not directly related, but the students are then asked to create a story on that basis. And they create them individually, and then they try and link those stories up. So they're single idea cards, but they are used in conjunction with one another. And again, I've seen several versions of that demonstrated, both in text form and visual form, to help students to tell stories or to join ideas together. The next type of cards then are pairs. So in this particular instance, the left-hand card is an example of a card which has an image on one side. So this is a kind of question and answer card set. So it's got an image on one side and it's got a set of questions on the others. And this can be quite an interesting way of essentially asking students to self-test or to test each other, or to simply use them in class to sort of make interesting discussion points. So I do this with, this is actually a set of cards which are stolen from the boxes downstairs, a game I stumbled across, which is just about brands in the UK. So I took out all the ones that actually had pictures in them because I think a visual stimuli is much more interesting as a starting point. On the right hand side is another example of this, but where you actually have dual cards. So instead of having one card with the question and answer on the opposite sides, here you have a set of cards with a context on them and another set of cards that have something which would be related. So the one on the right hand side, which again, I know nothing about Wilson disease, so I don't know what it is, but you have a diagnosis on one card and then you have a set of symptoms on another. And the idea is that students will go through the cards and try and match the diagnosis with the symptoms. So then, you know, many years ago, if I was presented with this, it would have been a list of things on one side and a list of things on the other, and you would have to draw lines to the various different bits. But I think working with cards again, for lots of reasons, is far more interesting and involving. So can you see how the topic that relates to the subject that you teach might possibly accommodate itself in terms of these kinds of cards? And if you can, this is where I'd like you to start actually adding to your post on Padlet. So if you've already identified a particular model, set of criteria, whatever it might be, and just put in brief notes there. And as I say, I'm quite happy to talk to people about these things after the event, or follow them up by emailing them after the event, talk to them about what it is that they put down or they threw down as an idea. And I'm also going to say this now, just in case I run out of time. I am quite happy to make anybody start a set of 20 cards based on an idea that they have. You can supply the images if you want, or I can supply them for you. I've done this for colleagues at my own institution, so that you can actually see what a set of cards would look like. And then hopefully that will inspire you to think about other ways in which you can use this. So we can then have grouping cards. I've already mentioned this briefly. So we teach a model called PEST, Political, Economic, Social, Technological. And this was actually the thing that I did on behalf of a colleague who wanted to give students an activity so that she could talk to some students, but the other students had something to get on with. So I created 6 sets of 20 cards. Each of them had a number of different factors on them, and we just gave the students the cards, and then they had to first of all go through the cards and work out which category the cards were in, and then they had to work out how likely they were, or how important they were, or how impactful they might be on the particular business that they were notionally involved in at the time. And then they had to move on and say, well, how might the business respond to this? So they were kind of discussion cards, but the first thing they had to do was to sort them into categories. And that also meant that there were some issues because some cards didn't neatly fit into a single category. So they might be cards that there would then be a discussion about which category that they would go into. So again, do you teach subjects where you can provide students with a whole load of factors or criteria, and then ask them to group them according to either a set of categories that you provide, or ask the students themselves to split them up in that way? And again, if that's something that you think would work, add that to the Padlet or put it into the chat bar. Or take a note of my email address, and please do have a chat with me outside of here. The next thing then would be, it's a very similar thing, except instead of just grouping things together, you actually rank them. And I chose Bloom's taxonomy on the left-hand side because I'm guessing, I'd be very surprised if anyone in the room hasn't come across Bloom's taxonomy. And it's that idea of giving people a set of categories and then going, okay, well, we want you to put them in order. And in fact, one of the very first icebreakers I was ever introduced to, which is available free online, is the NASA moonshot activity, where you're given a list of, I think it's about 20 different items. You're told you're stranded on the moon, and 20 different items that you can have. And the idea is that you rank them in order of their importance. And then you compare that with the ranking that was actually given by NASA. And you get points according to whether or not you've chosen things according to their rank. So I think the idea of giving students a set of things on individual cards so that they can move them about, they can change their mind, they can see what other students are doing, they can argue about why something is more important than something else, then they can sort of reflect on that. It is, again, it's a really nice active thing that involves lots of touching and moving and just, visualization of that process. And then the one on the right hand side, which just is attributes of a good. So, geographer, historian, artist, I don't know, whatever subjects you teach. And the reason I put that in was because the very first time I actually came across cards being used in a classroom environment was actually from a management educator from the US who came over, who had an enormous set of cards which were based around the attributes of a good manager. And students were asked to choose, I think, between 3 and 5 cards that they felt that reflected their strengths. I think they were asked to, they went through a number of exercises and then asked whether or not they reconsidered what their strengths were. They were asked to rank those strengths in order and compare them with other people, and then arrive at, if you were sort of teaching, these are the things which are most important to for managers, how would you decide that? So again, if you teach a subject or a topic within a subject that you think would benefit from that idea of being able to rank things in order, could you create a set of cards based on that, so that, instead of just giving them, this is Bloom's taxonomy, you could say, here are the things which make up Bloom's taxonomy, put them in the order that you think, that they should be in. And maybe Bloom's is a relatively simple version, but certainly within marketing we have dozens and dozens of these kind of hierarchies. And again, put that into the tablet if you can. 2 minutes. I've got 4, I think. I started at 11. In fact, I started just after 11. It's only 11:16. Either that or my timings, my computer's going mad. So types of cards, connecting cards. I put dominoes on the left because that's the easiest way to illustrate what I mean by connecting cards. And there are kind of 2 ways of doing this. The first one is if you're talking about process. So I did a continuous improvement accreditation, where that was one of the things you actually did. You identify all the parts of a process and then you put them in order, and then you work out, are there bits that you can remove, or are there ways of doing things more efficiently? So any kind of flow chart lends itself to this. And on the right hand side, that's an example of a game called Carcassonne, which is really a tile based game, but you can do the same thing with cards, where what you're looking for is how things connect. So you might, for example, if you were teaching, again, I don't know why so many of these come back to biology, because they really don't know anything about it. But if you were looking at the respiratory system or the nervous system, and you wanted to connect things up, and you wanted to say the order in which they went, or maybe, if you're teaching physio and you want people to understand the order in which bones connect. The next one in is collecting cards. The left-hand side is a board game that I created, which fundamentally was based around cards. So you needed to collect a set of particular cards in order to form a whole. In this case, these are the 4 Ps of the marketing mix. To explain this more simply, although again, I'm not sure how much this will resonate with the audience. If you've ever played gin rummy or gin rummy, because as far as I can work out, they're all pretty much the same game, where you're collecting cards, and what you're looking for is cards that you can put into sets. So that might either be cards of the same suit that have a run, 3, 4, 5, 6 of spades, or cards that have the same numerical value. And again, is there something you teach where what you're looking for is people to put things into groups where you can collect them together? And if I was teaching segmentation, this might be something that I would think of applying. The last one, and this is the one that I don't expect anyone to look at today. This is actually based on an existing game, but this is a game I created to teach marketing. And it's a deck building game. And if you know what a deck building game is, if you've ever played Pokemon, or you've played Pokemon with your children or grandchildren, the card game anyway, then you would understand that it is quite a clever way of asking people to make kind of strategic decisions about which cards they should keep and which cards they shouldn't. So in terms of, again, prioritizing, and then there's a degree of playfulness and competitiveness involved in that. There was one other which I wanted to mention, which was resources cards. This is from the game Settlers of Catan. Again, if you're a game board fan, then you'll know exactly how that works. If you don't, then it's about collecting resources to allow you to do something. So if you were teaching politics, for example, you might talk about how resources relate to one another in terms of what we need in order to achieve something. And again, if that fits with the topic that you teach within your subject, please add it to the Padlet. So I've already said this, there is a Padlet available, which I hope people are using. The Padlet will remain open. So you can add to it as you want after the event is closed. I've given you my email. Please do contact me if you want to have a chat, or you would like me to take me up on the offer of creating a set of 20 starter cards for you. We haven't really got time for comments, questions, or ideas. As far as my timing is concerned, I've got a minute left. So I'd just like to say thank you, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I know that I can see the chat bar again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think we got a minute before the next session comes up, the next presentation. So there are questions in the chat. Do you want to answer them in the chat? I think.
I'll do my best. I was scrolling back up. As I said, please feel free to use the Padlet at any point today, or indeed after today. I think I might have missed them.
Yeah, there are a few questions about sharing some of the cards you mentioned.
Okay, very happy to.
Yeah. Okay, and Roger put his email in, so if you email him directly about some of the cards he presented.